since July 2020 to pay the disputed tax, then it will be eligible for 100% of the disputed tax, even though payment is made after 30th of June 2020, since the amount is payable before 30th June 2020. Section 3 does not mention that the amount is to be paid before 30th June 2020 to be eligible for the 100% disputed tax liability. But FAQ 28, dated 4th March 2020, states that the payment has to be made before 31st March 2020, now 30th June 2020. Okay, so how do you resolve that? If the answer to the above is no, whether taxpayer makes a payment say 80% before 30th June 2020 in relation to the declaration filed, and the balance payment 20% is made after 30th of June, right? Can you save the 10% tax? And I think I dealt with that when I was covering, some of the slides. But basically, one would believe that the definition of the term payable in section 3 will need to be read as determined as payable by the designated authority. And therefore, so long as the payment is made within the time limit of 15 days as prescribed under the VSV Act, then one would believe that the 10% extra payment will not be required even if the tax is paid after 30th of June 2020. As I was mentioning, that when we at EY met the CBDT officials on 17th March 2020, we had raised a point of part payment, which is the question B in this whole question, the part B of the question. And there we did not get any response from the CBDT, because I think at that point they wanted all the tax payments by 31st of March 2020 to bolster the country's bottom line in that sense, if I may use that word very loosely. Now I think, given the fact that we are past the consideration of looking at 31st March, I would believe that a reasonable and a rational interpretation of section 3 should be given. And therefore, if you substantially comply with the section, right, of course, it is always better in terms of avoiding of dispute to pay the tax by 30th of June 2020. But for whatever reason you are unable to pay, then at least try and make part payment. If you are not able to even make part payment, I would still believe that as far as the compliance with the 15-day time limit is concerned, so if the payment is really made within that 15 days, I would believe that it should still not be an issue. But I would believe that, again, it is probably better to avoid any kind of dispute and show your bona fides to say that I am ready and willing to pay whatever I had by way of resources. Even part payment I have been able to commit. Of course, given COVID-19 and the impact it has on business, this may be a little difficult, but obviously each taxpayer will have to take his or her own decision. With that, I will hand over to Premanand for question number 2.
The facts are very simple. NRV order is passed in the month of December 19, appeal filed before CIT appeals, so pending as on 31st January 20. In the month of March, the appeal has been disposed of. Now, the outcome of the appeal has not been made very clear whether it is whether the assessor's appeal is accepted or rejected. Irrespective of that fact, this case, since the appeal was pending as on 31st January 2020, it is an eligible case to go under the VSVS. And particularly when given the fact that if the outcome of the appeal goes against the assessee, so then it's definitely a case where he should avail the benefit and pay the tax in that scheme. That's all, nothing big in this. Viraj, you can take question number 3.
Yes. Assessing is, I'll just read out the question. Assessing is return has filed a loss return of rupees 3 crores. The department under section 143.3 has passed an order and has added rupees 1 crore. And hence the total loss is now rupees 2 crores. The question is whether if someone wants to carry forward the 1 crore loss, how much tax will have to be paid and how much also, and if someone does not want to carry it forward, then how much tax will have to be paid? What are options available under the scheme? So as I think I explained, as per rule 9 of the rules, there are two options which has already been discussed. One is you pay the tax in the year in which there is a reduction of loss, or in option 2 you can carry it forward, and when you have set it off, utilize such loss in your subsequent years, will have to pay tax and interest on that. So I think that the calculation has already been given in the PPT I've explained. So we shared the presentation after this webinar, so it would be clear. Anish sir, next fourth one.
Thank you, Viraj. So the fourth question really relates to something where there is either an amalgamation, or then there is a death of a person, or there is a conversion of a partnership into LLP, right? How do you deal with the VSV? I am not going to go into part D, which is a little procedural in terms of, in whose name we'll probably deal with, but PAN, etc. That will, I think, be clarified in FAQ 2 is what we understand from the CBDT. But conceptually, let's understand that when there is an amalgamation, then the amalgamated company steps into the shoes of the amalgamating company. But if the amalgamation's appointed date is before 31st of January 2020, then what will happen is that as on 31st January 2020, you will not be able to say that the amalgamating company has survived. Okay, so the declaration will have to be made in the name of the amalgamated company. If you need precedent on this, that from the appointed date the amalgamating company is deemed to have never been in existence, there is a Bombay High Court decision in corporate law in the case of Chhaya versus Money and Mathur and Platt. Both these decisions basically are under company law. I don't have the citations right now in front of me. Unfortunately, I was not able to access them. But the names of the cases are correct. Chhaya versus Money and Mathur and Platt. Both of these are under company law. And both of these basically say that with effect from the appointed date, the amalgamating company dies. And therefore, even if the effective date of the amalgamation is subsequent, then there is the effect is only procedural. It is as if the amalgamating company had died. So in that situation, if the amalgamating company is no longer in existence, then the VSV declaration will have to be made in the amalgamated company's name, is what I would believe. Right, and it may cause a lot of procedural issues. I'll come to, we've had some discussions with the CBDT on these issues also, but we'll come to that in a moment. Now, if the amalgamating company is still in existence on 31st of March 2020, and it has gone into existence after 31st of March 2020, or gone out of existence after 31st of March 2020. The appointed date is after 31st of March 2020, but before the date of filing of the declaration. Then I would believe that the declaration will have to be filed by the amalgamated company as a representative or successor of the amalgamating company. And I would believe that logically the amalgamating company's PAN will have to be used, because in the department system also one will have to figure out how the effect has to come. But that is about, that is my view. When we talked about this to the CBDT itself was again not very clear about what they wanted. So they have noted the point on 17th of March 2020. They said that we will take this issue back and come back to you on, in the FAQ round 2. Unfortunately, FAQ round 2 has not happened. The same principle, I believe, should also apply to a legal representative filing for a dead person. So again, the legal representative will have to file the declaration in respect of the dead person's estate in the PAN of the dead person, and therefore, it will be again the same way that it will have to be. Again, this will probably be clarified by the CBDT, but one would believe that it cannot be filed under the representative's own PAN, because there are clearly two capacities in which a return is filed. One is as a legal representative or heir of the deceased, and one is the individual's own capacity. The third situation is when there is a partnership firm which is converted into a limited liability fund. Now there, one will have to be clear in terms of what effect one is giving to the tax PIN decision, as also contrasted by that celerity power decision of the Bombay Tribunal. Because when we talk about tax PIN, then tax PIN very clearly in the context of Part 9 said that the amalgamating entity dies, or it is the same entity which now continues to survive in any other form. So I would believe again, if the LLP is, the same entity in another form, then it should not matter. It can be filed under the LLP's PAN and by the LLP's designated part. But if we do not accept that and we accept celerity power's decision, that indeed there is a transfer and there are two different entities, then the answer may be different. I would believe that still celerity is a decision which needs to be reconsidered. I would believe that the tax PIN, logic is still good logic, and therefore one would believe that again in partnership versus LLP, you should be able to file as the LLP as if it were the LLP's own dispute. I think I've covered all of the situations.
Anish, I would like to add something here.
Yeah.
Right now the department is functioning in a strict, watertight situation, which is governed by the system animal called ITBA. Now ITBA runs only on a PAN. Okay. Now the PAN of the converting firm and the LLP will be two different PANs. And the data of the converting firm means as in the return date of filing of return, the taxes paid, and the whole history of that particular assessment, which would get basically converted into a VSVS application. So it will be very challenging to get it done in the name of the LLP.
I see. Okay, so there is then the practical difficulty, which is why probably they said that we will look at it in FAQ 2.
But it will have to be done. Even the old company cases which are amalgamation and other stuff. So that particular assessment which is going to go under the scheme will have its own whole history encased in a capsule, which is named by a particular PAN, and which you cannot ignore now.
I see. Because
the
challenge will be that the legal position and the procedural position then will be at variance with each other. And therefore, one of the two will have to prevail. As far as I think this scheme is concerned, somewhere, the CBDT appears to have given itself a lot of leeway in terms of the legal position, is what I am able to see. So I would not be surprised in this case also if a leeway is given just for completion of the procedure. And that also I think is not entirely, how do I put it, out of place, given that you are ending a dispute. So, it really
Yeah, either
does
way,
not
finish
matter
it.
in terms of procedure, in terms of, yes, there'll be some procedural difficulty for us chartered accountants. But, if there is a clear way forward given, then I would believe that it would be easier to just get that dispute settled one way or the other.
Yeah. Just to mention one more issue, there is a procedure under the system to migrate tax payments from the amalgamating company to the amalgamated company. So that should not be a big hindrance, if at all, if it comes to that.
Noted. So you can take question 5.
Okay, PMGKY.
Yes.
Very non-diligent assessee. He has unfortunate chap has paid the tax under PMGKY, did not deposit the 25% which was required to be made deposit under the PMGKY, and so if both these conditions are not fulfilled, that is payment of tax and payment of deposit, which is basically the payment of tax of 50% and deposit of 25% under PMGKY. The declaration under PMGKY could have never been made by the assessee, and the tax paid under PMGKY gets deposited into the government treasury, what we can call as a Gandhi fund. So it's gone. He cannot take a credit for that in his regular tax proceedings. That is number one. So given these facts, he will have to, since he has filed the appeal before CIT appeal, he will have to go under the scheme if he wishes to and pay the tax again. He doesn't get credit of the PMGKY tax for sure. This is as per this is you can refer to section 199M of PMGKY scheme. I think that's all.
So what you partly paid in one scheme cannot be used as offset in another scheme.
No, because the amount paid under PMJKY was not under the Income Tax Act. It was not an income tax payment. It was under that PMJKY scheme itself. It was a separate standalone scheme.
I think Section 7 mandates the amount should be paid under the income tax. The explanation.
That's right. So unless there is a payment made under the Income Tax Act itself, that payment will not be able to be set off. So be careful that if you are making a payment under, say, some special act, and if that payment is partly paid, you will not be able to offset. So whatever you made under the PMGKY, if that is not sufficient and your opportunity to declare income under the Income Disclosure Scheme 2016 is gone, then I think it's gone.
And also, I believe the PMGKY payment were not reflected in the 26AS form as well. So it was a separate carve out as far as the payment is concerned.
Okay. Yes. Viraj, question 6.
Yeah. So in question 6, so basically CIT appeal was filed against the penalty order. There was a delay of 10 days. So CIT appeal in this dismissed the appeal on the basis of not allowing the delay of 10 days. So CIT appeal straight away dismissed that. And hence the associate filed IT-80 appeal to allow and condone the delay of the 10 days. So here the question is whether we can opt for VSV scheme against the penalty order passed by the here the important point is that we need to check when one has filed the CIT appeal. So even if there is a condonation of delay, but the CIT appeal has been filed before 31st of January 2020, and if IT-80 condones the delay, then the CIT appeal will stand revived. So once it is revived, the appeal will be pending, and it will be pending as on or before 31st January 2020, and hence then therefore one can be eligible under the VSP scheme. But if the CIT appeal has been filed after 31st January 2020, then it would be a very difficult stand for the assessee to take the stand that he is eligible for the VSP scheme.
unless we are in a situation where that draft order is passed and then you are waiting for the
Yes.
final order to happen. In which
Yes.
case you can file your CIT appeals after 31st January and still be eligible. But
Then we'll
that
be
is only that one FAQ, whatever that number 16 or
Yes.
whatever that will protect.
Yes.
But in that limited circumstance.
Right. Right.
So, Anish, here one will have to ask one basic question. The various conditions under the VSVS, you have to satisfy as on 31st January 2020 or as on filing of the declaration. So you take a case here where the belated appeal was filed before 31st January and the delay was not condoned by CAT appeal. One went to the ITAT and ITAT condoned the delay before 31st January 20. So as on 31st January 20, one could definitely say that the appeal was pending. Now take a slightly different case where the order of the ITAT is passed after 31st January 20, but before filing of the declaration.
So let's put it this
Yes.
way, that the effect of a condonation of delay is that the appeal filing date still remains what it is.
The one.
Yeah, it doesn't change.
That does not change. And therefore, if that appeal filing date, even if it gets condoned, the delay does get condoned. If your appeal filing date is after 31st of January, I would believe that on a very literal reading of the VSV scheme, you may not actually be, eligible.
Right.
Unless they clarify this again in FAQ 2, where they say, okay, we are giving you a benefit. Because somewhere, in this, at least VSV, I am seeing that the FAQs are in terms of giving benefit going beyond the basic wordings of the scheme also. So if they are able to give you that, then it may be a completely different issue altogether.
Because in one of the departmental joint meetings, I had mentioned this fact, where I told them that let the assessee, if you want to give benefit to the assessee, let the assessee file an appeal today, and you yourself ask the CIT appeal to condone the delay. So but it's not actually workable that way, because the appeal was not there before 31st January. So out of question that.
So I think Parag's question on the chat that I am seeing, because since we are discussing this, Parag's question is really, if both are pending on 31st January 2020, can I go? The answer to that, Parag, is yes. If your condonation is accepted and your appeal is then deemed to have been filed on the date before 31st of January 20. So I think that should not be a problem, so long as you get a condonation before the filing of your declaration.
Yeah, I would go with that.
Yes. And I think even in Kar Vivad scheme, so there was 2 Supreme Court decisions. So wherein Supreme Court had held that even the appeal, if the appeal has been filed belated, so there is delay in filing, but it has been filed before the specified date, then it should be allowed. So I would just like to, I don't remember the names, but I have 2 citations. One is 296 ITR 1 Supreme Court and 277 ITR 430. That was in relation to Kar Vivad scheme, but there Supreme Court had allowed.
But I would believe that the same principle should
Yes,
really hold good for this one also.
Yes, absolutely. I think next question, sir. Anish, sir.
Mine.
Yes.
Okay, this, I think question number 7 we already talked about, that if there is a CIT appeal pending, then I am not eligible to go in for that 50%. And there has been a reference made to FAQ 7. I just want to draw attention to the fact that FAQ 7 does not in a way look at the quantum of the tax payable. So yes, it is in some case probably something that the department does not consider, or the government does not think it fit to consider a CIT appeal favorable decision as a binding favorable decision. It is only tribunal upwards that a decision in favor of a taxpayer is regarded as a binding favorable decision for the taxpayer. So a CIT appeal favorable decision unfortunately will not, be sufficient for you to claim the 50% benefit. Premanand, question it.
Again, a case of a non-diligent assessee. The quantum appeal is being disputed, but penalty is not disputed, and the penalty amount also has been paid. So in this case, uh, uh, if we can have two situations here where both the quantum appeal and the penalty appeal both are pending before an appellate authority, and the second is where only quantum appeal is pending. So in this case, in a case where both the appeals are pending, one has to only settle the quantum appeal, and there is no need for paying the 25% of the penalty, which is waived off as a gratis, what one can call. And in our case, he will have to settle the quantum appeal by paying the base tax amount, and the penalty amount paid by him uh, goes off. Means he doesn't get a set off against his tax liability arising out of the quantum appeal. I think that's it. Viraj.
Yes. Question 9. I'll just read. In a case where assessee has opted for VSP and a final certificate has been issued to him, whether department would be barred for reopening the assessment case under section 148 for the particular assessment year as per the provisions of section 5 of the VSP, even though that reopening is on basis of any audit objections, fresh tangible material, etc. So here if we read section 5 bracket 3, every order passed under subsection 1 determining the amount payable under this act shall be conclusive as to the matter stated therein, and no matter covered by such order shall be reopened in any other proceeding under the Income Tax Act or any other law for the time being in force, or any other agreement whether for protection of investment or otherwise entered into by India with any other country or territory outside India. So I think section 5 bracket 3 is very clear that matter which is covered in this declaration cannot be reopened. The reopening can be made for that particular assessment year, but not for that particular issue. So let's say my additions were X. Definitely department, if obviously on merits, that reopening has to stand. There has to be some tangible material or some objection. But if that is there, if the department has some audit objection or some tangible material relating to why, then relating to why reopening can stand. That is in my view.
Just to hair split in this issue, say take a case of a bogus purchase matter which is being discussed. Now, bogus purchase from party A.
Yes.
The assessee settles under VSVS. The department gets information that this assessee has also made a bogus purchase from party B.
Okay.
Okay. Now the issue is bogus purchase.
Right.
Means the addition under section 68 arising out of bogus purchase. So whether one can say that that particular window or whatever is debarred from 148 issue, or that 148 issue is restricted only to bogus purchase from party A, and bogus purchase from party B is still open for a 148 notice issue.
In my view, it would be open to reopen, because only matters which are covered in the declaration.
That's what I'm saying. Matters. Matters means, when I say matter means, I would say bogus purchase. I've settled my bogus purchase matters with the department.
Not necessarily, because your dispute in respect of bogus purchases is only with regard to party A.
Yeah.
Very aggressive to contend that all my bogus purchases issues have been settled. Because I have to settle an issue which is under dispute. I do not have to, or I am not given leeway under the Act, VSV Act, to settle an issue which is not under dispute. So that also is something that one will have to be cognizant about. One would believe that if there is a bogus purchase from party B, then that is not under dispute because it is not discovered, let's put it that way. Then I'm sure that reopening, subject to time limit being available and information being available and all the process being completed in with diligence and under due process of law, should be possible.
No, because why I brought up this topic was most of the audit objections or reopenings today happen on only these 3-4 points. One is the penny stock, one is bogus purchase, one is the client code modification, and fourth one is the bogus capital. So one transaction may have been caught earlier, second transaction may be caught in phase 2. So you will be open to phase 2 reassessment proceedings again, irrespective of the fact whether you go under VSBS or not. Correct?
Right.
Sure.
Yes.
Next.
Yes.
So if I take question number 10, then the question really says this, that I have my appeal with the CIT appeal. I have filed it on 28th of January before 31st of January. In my case, addition is made by the AO on 2 grounds. I appeal only for 1 ground. My query is whether I can go and request CIT to allow me to submit an additional ground of appeal. If yes, then what procedure should I adopt? Now, question is very theoretical, because if I would have believed that my matter was so material that I needed to settle it later, then I should have filed my appeal. But presuming for whatever reason I was ill advised or whatever, and I still want to settle it today, I would believe that the additional ground has to be admitted by the CIT appeal first, because that will then start the dispute in respect of the ground number 2. So if you have 2 grounds, on 1 ground you have an appeal file, you file an additional ground saying that I want to cover ground number 2. If the CIT appeal is benevolent enough, if I was the CIT appeal, I would not be, but if the CIT appeal is benevolent enough and he admits your second ground, then I would believe that that ground gets admitted in your appeal which is pending as on 31st of January 2020, and then that ground also is deemed to be pending on 31st of or 28th of January 2020 when you filed your appeal. So in that situation, you should get the additional ground admitted, right? And then file your declaration and hope that the designated authority does not, create any problem. If it does also, it is challengeable according to me, because once the additional ground is admitted, it gets tagged to the pending appeal which is pending as on the specified date. But again, this will be a situation where you may have to probably get into a little bit of a involved discussion. I think given the fact that the department is so willing to settle old pending disputes, they might even admit your additional ground, and the designated authority may even allow you to settle this amount, settle this dispute under VSB. So I see no problem, except that you will need to complete the procedure of getting the additional ground admitted.
Anish, on a very practicality issue, invariably the admission of additional grounds, is taken up only when the matter is to be heard either by CIT appeals or by the tribunal. There is no separate, there is no procedure for a separate order or some communication which you get from any of these authorities for admission of additional grounds. At least not to my knowledge.
Which is a fair point, but since the question was theoretical, the answer is also theoretical. Because I would think that it would be extremely rare to find a situation where I believe the ground is material enough, but I have not filed an appeal. Yeah. And if otherwise the ground is not material enough, then I would not want to settle it under VSV, just pay the tax and finish it.
Normally, in practice, one if there is one ground to be agitated, you take up 3 grounds actually,
Yeah.
Yes.
whether required or not required, because you can always withdraw the grounds at the time of hearing. Sure, ठीक.
Yeah.
So question number 11.
Yes.
Okay. Now this is covered by the FAQ number 7. Exactly. So here the assessee will have to take a call how he wants to go about. Means what are his chances in further appellate proceedings? Because the stand taken by the department is that where I'll just read the particular sentence of FAQ 7, which reads that in such a case, I'll read the question first. If assessment has been set aside for giving proper opportunity to an assessee on the addition carried out by the AO, can he avail the VSVS with respect to such additions? This is FAQ 7. The answer given is in a part of the answer actually. In such a case, disputed tax shall be the tax including surcharge and cess which would have been payable had the addition in respect of which the order was set aside by the appellate authority was to be repeated by the AO. So here the facts given are that the addition made is of 57 crores on a 68. The plausible uh, addition after relief of telescoping works out to 17 crores. So here, what if one has to go under the VSVS scheme, one will have to pay tax on 57 and not 17. That is issue as far as this issue is concerned. Anybody, Anish or Viraj, you have anything
Yeah.
else?
No, let's move
No,
on because I
no,
think we are
no.
also short of time. So we need to
Yes.
complete a lot.
Yes.
Let's do it fast.
Okay. So the next question is, in case of a declarant who is a company, will benefit of immunity from penalty and prosecution be extended to the directors and principal officer of the company as well? Say in case of settlement of TDS dispute. Similarly, whether such immunity extends to partner of LLP or firm where the declaration is filed by the LLP or the firm. So I think as regards to penalty is concerned, the penalty is levied on the company. So penalty, so once the declaration has been filed, so the company is immune from the penalty and no penalty will be levied. But as far as the prosecutions are concerned, it will obviously directors are the representative of the company. So once I've settled the position and settle this under the VSP scheme. So for that issue, prosecution, in my opinion, would be very difficult to be, that prosecution will be there on the company as well. And as regards LLP and firm, I think similar view should be had. And as far as the objective of the scheme is concerned, it won't be. I don't think prosecution should also be levied on them.
Sure. Anish, question number 13.
Question 13. Really, the question is on something where what is my rate of tax? Should it be 112A rate or should it be MMR? Now, before I answer that question, I would believe that purely legal issues, right, are a little difficult to settle as far as the VSV is concerned. Because what will happen is, say I settle the issue for 1 year. Now, this is not going to be a precedent for me for some other year, right? And therefore, it really wouldn't matter. My dispute would continue. So unless I have an exceptional situation where, say, I am an EIF and this is my last year of the fund, where I want to settle this issue saying what is my rate, right? And is it MMR or is it 112A rate? And I want to settle the issue saying forget it, finish it, right? Or I have a favorable, decision in my favor from the tribunal, like you have, saying that MMR for the purpose of long-term capital gains is the long-term capital gain. So therefore, your 112A rate on that basis will be your MMR. Now, if that is something that you have in your own case in the tribunal and you want to pay 50% of the tax and settle it, because it is the last year of the fund, you want to pay back your money to the investor, then I would think that that is something that you should probably go for. But otherwise, on an issue of pure legal interpretation, you should, in my humble view, consider going for the VSVS very, 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 very carefully, because it doesn't serve any purpose in my humble view. Same is the case where Samir raised the question, Samir Sanghvi, that on issues of say capital versus revenue, or in issues of timing, where an expenditure is to be allowed in year 1 or year 2, there has to be a clarification for consequential relief. And yes, one would agree that there has to be a clarification for consequential relief. But I would think that per se, if there is really an issue of timing, would I urge a client to go in for the VSV? I would believe not, unless my interest liability is so significant that I would, want to escape the interest liability. But there again, then maybe, if the clarification does not come that my consequential relief has to be given, then I'll have to weigh the consequences of no consequential relief versus an interest liability. So unless my dispute is really, 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 really old, right, I would not even go in for that kind of a dispute under the VSV. That is my personal view. Again, it should not be taken otherwise. If people do want to go ahead, should. But I would think that on pure issues like this, which are either legal or timing, then I would think that VSV may be not a very optimum or an ideal methodology to settle that dispute, because that will continue in the times to come. Yes, question 14.
Yeah, 14 is that way, where you choose not to carry forward loss in year 1. So obviously in the year 2 in which you had set off the loss, you will have to pay additional tax. And in year 2, the facts are that you are going under VSVS on some other issue, which is not connected with the issue of set off of the brought forward losses. So here you would get the benefit of reduced of the interest waiver only for the issue which you take up under VSVS for year 2, and the additional bump up interest which is arising out of the non-set off of losses of year 1 cannot be covered in year 2 VSVS application. So that's it.
Yeah. Question number 15. So in question number 15, assessee wants to settle these 2 years, year 1 and year 2. So once he settles year 1, there is refund arising, and in year 2 there is demand which is going to get payable. So the question is whether year 1 refund can I adjust against my year 2 demand, and in part B, where I have my crystallized other year's refund, can I adjust that against the year 2 demand? So in my opinion, as per VSP Act, there is no bar of adjusting the refunds and making the payment. The VSP Act does not bar. So I think the assessee will have to inform the designated authority about the same. And in my view, since the Act does not bar, the adjustment should be permissible. I think if any contrary view.
No, it won't operate this way. If you have a real cash flow issues with you, so if in year 1 you are having a refund case and year 2 you have a payable case, so settle the year 1 under VSVS first, get over with it, get the refund, adjust it to year 2, and then file year 2 application. Because under the VSVS application, there is no procedure for adjustment of refund of year 1 to year 2.
Yes, as of, yeah.
So that will be a better position.
Right.
Yeah. So you clear first year 1 and then go to year 2.
just in case we are short of time, as in the phase 1, phase 2 issue, then there might be a issue.
Difficult.
Yeah.
Anish, question number 16.
Yeah. Next phase.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. My apologies. So the question number 16 relates to 201 and 40A1A. So what happens is, if I settle a dispute under 201, I get a deduction under 40A1A, but my deductee gets credit of the TDS only in the year in which I make the settlement payment. So he does not get a credit in the year of dispute. He gets a credit in the year in which I have actually done the settlement and made the payment. And therefore, the question really remains is that, can I, ask for a waiver of that interest, or is the interest payment that is being made by the deductee unfair? And the answer to that is, in a way, it is unfair to the deductee. The default is that of the deductor, right? And you know uh, the default is therefore that of the deductor, and the deductor in that sense should bear the consequences of his non-payment of tax. Now, unfortunately, the way the FAQs have clarified this, the deductee has to bear the brunt of the tax. Now, I would believe that in large situations, the deductee should normally, in ordinary circumstances, have a contractual remedy to recover tax from the deductor, particularly in case of transactions where you involve buying and selling of a large block of shares outside of the stock exchange. Right? In that, when we do those transactions, we always provide a indemnity clause where, in a way, the deductee, if each of the parties, if he has any problem, will be able to take recourse to the other. Now, in this situation, if there is a contractual remedy, then the deductee can probably go and claim against the deductor. But remember that conceptually, it is the deductee's liability, and the income is of the deductee. And therefore, yes, it is not his fault that somebody has paid the tax. So he'll have to invoke a commercial action against the deductor if the contract so permits, but otherwise he has to bear the tax. Question 70. Privana.
Yes, if you the barring clause, it says that section 9A2 relating to an assessment year in respect of which prosecution has been instituted on or before the date of filing of declaration. So here the assessee wants to go in for VSVS for quantum issue, and the prosecution has been launched, instituted for a TDS non-compliance. So here again, we have to come back to our earlier part of discussion, because as on the date of the designated date of 31st January, there is a prosecution outstanding. So the assessee would be advised to go for compounding of the prosecution issue, ask the particular Princey to withdraw the prosecution, and then request the Princey to accept your VSVS application. That is the which I believe should be permitted by the department. Independent of the VSVS application, it would be always beneficial to go for compounding of a prosecution issue and finish that matter once for all. That's it.
Last question will be answered by Viraj. 18. We will skip last three.
Okay. So the 18 question, I'll just read. So if there is substantial addition which is made in respect of any issue for an assessment year, and also there is some protective assessment which is made for the same issue in another year, and whether an appeal has been filed in both the years, what amount shall be payable under the scheme. I think FAQ question number 35 is very clear. So if I settle the substantial addition which is made, then the protective addition, there won't be any tax on the protective addition, and it can very well be rectified by the AO, and application needs to be made. So once an addition has been made, addition has been the settled under the VSV scheme, the same addition cannot again be made. I think question number 35 of FAQ is making it very clear.
Yes, I think with that, let us stop here. We are already 15 minutes over the time, and I will hand it back over to Rohan. But from Viraj, from Premanand, and from me, let me just say thank you to all of you who stayed through right till the very end, and thank you also to those who came and went. Uh, this is the first experiment we had, and please do send in your feedback in terms of whether you would like such more sessions. And obviously, if you would like such more sessions, we will definitely organize more such sessions. We'll resolve the technological issue. We've taken that on board. So thank you very much. Rohan, over to you.
Yeah, I would thank you, Anish sir, Premanand sir, and Viraj for conducting the webinar on and accepting our invitation at a very short notice, and accepting an invitation on a very short notice and conducting the webinar in a precise manner. You explained us all the FAQs and the provisions of the Vivad Se Vishwas schemes in a precise manner. It was also good on your part to explain all the queries raised by the participants in a clear and cut version. Lastly, I would like to thank Akash, one of our conveners, in making this webinar a successful. It was his part, the technological input that he gave us, which helped us in making this webinar a successful. As Anish sir rightly pointed out, there were some glitches. We would make sure that these glitches will not come in the next meeting, and hope everyone enjoyed the webinar which was conducted by Matunga Study Center. Thanking you once again. Thank you.
Thank you, and stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye. Ciao.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Yeah.
Take care.
So,
Bye.
yeah. Bye.